to segment 611, strategies for the exiting company. I'm on page 287, and in this case study analysis that you read, it discussed what I would say a better end solution sometimes for exiting companies. So exiting companies often fall into two buckets. Bucket number one, we're out of money and we're in a state of bankruptcy, and how do we recoup some of our costs? Route number two is we are being acquired. So it's an exit strategy that's being implemented or some manner. And what do we do in response to that? In the present case, this company was, as I talked about, on the brink of bankruptcy. When you're on the brink of bankruptcy, usually you're scaling back, you're cutting costs as much as possible. The CEO that actually took over saw that there was a lot of opportunity with the company as far as its brand is concerned, and they already had a number of products that were being sold. I think it talked about there were by 2010 they were designing, manufacturing, and marketing over 15,000 products. Now, obviously, when they were having issues back in the 1980s, it wasn't necessarily to that extent a 15,000 type product company. Nonetheless, it was one that definitely had they were producing and they were manufacturing. I think the key thing that I want to bring to your attention is when you are at let's say, the brink of bankruptcy, you often have two different routes, and that is one, we understand we're in bankruptcy, let's accept it and let's move on. And that route often goes through some restructuring of the company, where in short it is winding down how it is that it is operating. Route number two is, okay, we recognize that there is a significant issue here. How do we re-gear the company so that we can actually exit out of this issue that we are in? And that is exactly what it is that this company did. So they took a step back and they said, okay, what's the issue? They identified the issue. How do we resolve it? Now, one of the things I really like on page 288 is that it emphasized how the brand name was the most essential and valuable resource and element to the entire company. And so it became so important to the CEO that there was, the story of some dud refrigerators that just weren't working. The CEO said, destroy them all. That if we go ahead and we sell a dud, that impacts the brand itself and the integrity of the consumers to the actual brand. And so they went ahead, they supposedly destroyed them, but it became, the focus was very much just on building this brand image over time. And that was exactly what ended up occurring. So in the case of this company, they used their IP, in this case mainly trademarks, as the basis to re-gear and reconsider and take the company to a position where now it's over 15,000 products that are being manufactured, designed, and distributed worldwide. Now, with that said, let's go ahead and look at some of the slides. So when you are in an exit stage, generally speaking, you are not necessarily looking so much at as far as innovation and protecting new ideas. So, but that being said, IP is often one of the last ingredients or elements that's left after a restructuring type process. So even in the case of Kodak, which we'll look at, the company had gone through a whole restructuring of as far as how it is that things were structured. But IP at the end of the day still remained, and the question becomes, what do we do with this? Do we create a licensing stream out of it? Do we sell it, etc., etc.? As far as increasing leverage, the exit stage is all about increasing leverage. Now, that is dependent upon whether or not steps have been taken in advance so that you actually have some leveraging potential. So if you are going to be acquired, the question is, is the portfolio that you have been building up over time going to be acquired by the company, or will you retain ownership rights of it? Not only that, can you negotiate better terms of this acquisition type agreement based on some valuation of the portfolio? So if you have spent considerable time and that portfolio is worth, or at least is very applicable to products that are current in the market today, that might allow you to increase your leveraging potential. You can say, you know what, we appreciate that you're interested, we appreciate that you want to acquire the company. I think that we need to take a better look at the value that our IP is providing to this transaction. So it can, in fact, often increase the value of the company when it's in discussion talks as far as being acquired. Now, the flip side of that is if you're going bankrupt, how do you actually increase your potential? And that is you look at whether or not you can bolster a competitor's IP portfolio by doing a strategic sell to them. You can auction it. So as far as leveraging your potential, it's leveraging the position of the company with respect to the market. And you can do that by showing applicability of the portfolio to specific companies in the market. The more applicability that you can show to companies in the market, the higher the leveraging potential there is. Now, I think one other thing to keep in mind is, as far as protecting core assets, I indicated that often at this stage, you're not necessarily looking at protecting additional new core technology type concepts. But the reality is, let's assume that you're a startup, you're in exit stage, you are being acquired. Do you have additional ideas often that have not yet necessarily been formally pursued via patent protection? And the answer to that, often in the case of startups, is yes. There's often a lot that goes on in companies, and there's this filtering type process where you want to pursue protection on as many things as possible, but cost-wise, you have to be very selective. Otherwise, you'll just simply use everything up in the bank. And so you're selectively going after protection, and you've built up this portfolio. One of the things you can do before you're being acquired is file a number of provisionals. Now you say, well, why would you invest and use some of your own money even prior to the acquisition? And this is not necessarily with respect to increasing leveraging potential with respect to being acquired. It increases the leveraging potential after acquisition. And what I mean by that is often the party that's acquiring the startup will take all the assets, and now it's underneath this umbrella. And they will transfer ownership, things of that nature. And they will start pursuing things thereafter. Now, if this startup company starts coming up with ideas, now what ends up occurring is often it will go through the parent company's IP branch, and it will be the parent company's name that is going out as far as the source of the IP, things of that nature. And that would be consistent with a lot of different flows. Now, you compare that model to, let's say, startup has a portfolio that's going to be acquired, and right before acquisition, startup files, let's say, 10, 20 different provisionals. And these are very robust provisionals. It's all the engineering teams coming together, and they put on file everything in essence that they still can get on file, that it may not be necessarily as fully developed as some of their other concepts, but it was still sufficiently developed to be put on file. And then right before the acquisition completes, they get that all on file, and then they're acquired. So it's still underneath the same umbrella. The difference is, let's assume that some of these new ideas are based off of some of those provisionals. And what it comes down to is who it is they can point the finger at as to the source of the new ideas that are now emerging. Situation one, the startup, let's say, is at the table with the parent company. They've already been acquired, and the parent company says, you know, this was obviously a very good move on our part. We acquired startup company. You can see that based off of our expertise going into this startup company, you know, an additional 20 patents have resulted where our engineering teams have been able to collaborate with yours. And based off of this mutual collaboration, obviously X, Y, and Z resulted. Now you can contrast that with the situation B, or a second situation where the startup filed all these provisionals right before acquisition. Startup is at the table, company, the parent company says, all right, over the last year, obviously, you know, the collaboration between our teams has resulted in a lot of patent filings. And the startup can now say, it has. But isn't it wonderful to see that all these ideas that have been filed were based off of the provisionals that we filed even prior to acquisition? So what does it actually do? It allows the startup to get recognition for their contribution to the overall parent company's type structure. When they don't do that, often the startup will be acquired by the company, and the company will simply assume that anything that is derived thereafter is based off of the influence of that large company. In other words, they get the recognition for the source of what is being created. Whereas if they have all these provisionals on file, the startup can still recognize and retain some recognition of their efforts and their contribution, which allows them to increase their leveraging potential as far as influence within the company after acquisition. In the exit phase, the question is, how do I manage? And at this point, it's all about confirming IP matters, making sure that matters are actually correctly assigned to the entity, or so that, in short, you're in a position to liquidate them correctly, either selling them, auctioning them, or potentially even asserting them, should you choose to. As far as investments, well, you are not investing any further. So generation, there really is nothing further for you to actually acquire. If you're going to be acquired, this is where I indicate, for example, you might want to file as many provisionals as possible prior to the acquisition. Bankruptcy, there's no money to generate. So as far as positioning yourself, it could be similar to small and medium businesses or established corporations, namely that you can be showing the applicability of your portfolio to players in the marketplace, which again would increase your leveraging potential, but also allows you to be in a position where, as you are going to be acquired, allows you to show the value that you can add to the company as well. Bankruptcy, there is no money again to go after or defend yourself, generally speaking, so that is usually not an option. As far as securing your place in the market, if you're acquired, it would be similar, or being acquired, it would be similar to small and medium businesses or established corporations, in the sense that you are continuing to secure yourself in the marketplace, see where it is that your strategies actually stick, maintain all the assets as much as you can. Bankruptcy, again, there's no money to secure. You want to get out as quickly as possible. So an example here, this was Kodak obviously was the name, a very well-known household name for almost a century, decades upon decades. In fact, even if you go to the U.S. Patent Office, they have a museum there in which traces innovation over the last century, some of the key significant players. They even have an inventor Wall of Fame, in which every single year there's inventors that are nominated to their Hall of Fame. But there's a part of this museum that is just dedicated to Kodak. And you can see all the iterations of the cameras that existed over the last century and how it is that they change, etc. And so Kodak was this very well-known name, and it's almost a lot of individuals and others in the marketplace felt almost sadness that this household type name suddenly was on the brink of bankruptcy. In fact, it wasn't even on the brink, it was in the midst of considerable bankruptcy type discussions. And The question is, what do you do if that occurs? I mean, they have this immense patent portfolio. They've developed and innovated actively over the last literally 100 years. What is it worth? The company's being sold off, all the physical assets are being sold off, and what you're left with often are the intangible, the intellectual property. Can that be even worth anything? And on one hand, what ended up occurring here was a sale of it talks about how, for example, Intellectual Ventures and RPX. RPX is a defense type aggregation company where they will acquire rights to a patent portfolio, and then they will license those rights out to members that pay essentially a membership type fee to be part of this patent pool. Similar to when we were discussing earlier about the Wright brothers and Glenn Curtiss and how they were forced to be part of this patent pool during World War I. RPX almost acts as a patent pool of sorts, where they will bundle and put things into this pool, and then members have access often to a lot of the assets in that pool. Intellectual Ventures is a patent assertion type company where they acquire rights and then they assert the rights. So $527 million was paid by 12 intellectual property licensees organized by Intellectual Ventures and RPX. So RPX and Intellectual Ventures acting together brought 12 parties to the table. Those 12 parties paid $527 million. Another portion was paid by Intellectual Ventures, which acquired a substantial majority of the digital imaging patent portfolio subject to these new licenses. So, in short, a substantial amount of money was being paid for the rights developed by Kodak, namely the patent rights in particular. These rights can be very significant, and so we see here that even hundreds of millions of dollars sometimes may be paid to acquire the rights to intellectual property. So in the case of Kodak, that would be an exit type strategy in relation to a company that was going through bankruptcy. What we have here is an exit strategy for Nest Labs. It was only 3 years old when Nest was actually, at the time of its acquisition, it was sold for $3.2 billion. So you think about that, a 3-year type company being sold for $3.2 billion. That's crazy. So it was an assignor on 43 assets, and they were the assignee on 220 assets. So that means that the assignor, that means that they granted rights to somebody else on 40 plus assets, and they were assignee, that means on a lot of the inventions that they were the owner of over 200 assets. Talks about, there was a quote, Nest has been granted 40 patents, they've acquired 60, and they filed for more than 200. In September, Nest cut a deal with Intellectual Ventures, again that's the same company I just indicated, that gives it access to 40,000 patents for defensive purposes. So they can, in similar manner, join the patent pool that's being managed by Intellectual Ventures, which may give it rights to 40,000 patents. They can use that from a defensive point of view. If somebody comes against them, they may be able to go into this pool, one, to either show that they have a license to something in the pool, which may nullify the argument that's being used against them, or secondly, they may be able to use it for defensive type purposes, where if somebody comes against them, they can say, you know what, let me reach into this pool of 40,000 assets and see if I can find something that's potentially applicable to you. So, but in short, what ended up occurring is it says here, Google may have been interested in this portfolio of patents focused on home automation and related technology. While Nest has already built a strong reputation for design and user experience, we believe Google would not have purchased the company if it did not have substantial and valuable intellectual property associated with the design of embedded systems. So the idea here was Google really just interested in a thermostat? And the answer is, well, they probably thought it looked cool. They probably thought that it functioned well, but the IP would give them a competitive advantage in the marketplace. because a lot of their IP focuses on home automation, on similar type technology, even related to embedded systems. Google is in that space. They are interested in home automation. They're interested in embedded systems. So the concept alone of just a thermostat type company was probably not the compelling reason why it is that Google was willing to pay $3.2 billion for the company. Google was likely interested in paying $3.2 billion for the company because, for the reason that it was more than just a thermostat that they were buying. They were buying rights to a lot of embedded home automation type system technology. And so when we look again at, we talked about if you're being acquired, how do you increase your leveraging potential? One of the ways that you can do that is by showing the value of your IP with respect to players in the marketplace. The more players, the more marketplace, the more activity, then that allows you to actually show how it is that there is more value to what it is that you're being providing, or what you're providing to the acquiring company, which can again drive up the price more.